Hey there, everyone. We are live at this point in my amazing living room. Hopefully everyone is doing well. Happy Monday. Just felt like doing another live. We did one last week, kind of did a Q&A. I'm going to give it a few minutes, though, to get us started here. But we did a Q&A last week, opened it up to questions from y'all. This week, I might have a little more of a topic. I'd like to kind of talk about growing as a data engineer. I've just been thinking about that a lot. So I'll give a few minutes to see if anyone joins in. Just make sure this is public. It should be. Yeah. So I'll give a few minutes people to come in. We got some people joining. Oh, you know what? I need to whenever I do live, I need to, while I wait for this, get like some music or something in the background. I realize a lot of people do that as they're waiting. Happy Monday, though, for everyone who's joining. If you're just joining in, feel free to post or ask some questions. Cool. We're getting some more people. Awesome. Kind of get started here shortly. Hopefully everyone's week is going well. Everyone, is enjoying. Well, it's turning fall. Happy Monday. Yep. Happy Monday. Happy Monday, Lamar. Fall is upon us, hopefully. I mean, I'm mostly getting it. Hopefully everyone's enjoying the interesting, well, not enjoying. I was going to say there's been some interesting drama on the WordPress front, which just makes me think of all the open source stuff that's happened in the last year. I think I posted about that earlier. Let's see. Any videos for intermediate Ds? We've been here since 2022 and have gone through the mundane videos getting started. How do you get to the second stage, i.e. senior? Okay. Well, I'll kind of start digging into that because that's kind of what I'm thinking this video to be about. I think I once posted something about growing from mid to senior, etc. And I've written an article about it too, but I think it's good to talk about. So I guess just answering maybe a little bit about this and kind of my thoughts on how to get to senior. Let me leave that question up. So going to senior, I think there are a few different buckets here. Because there's the easy bucket. I say there's the well-defined buckets at some companies of how to get to a more senior engineer. In fact, actually, let me pull this up. I'll pull up an article here about that just because it kind of covers it. It'll give me some of my own notes from past me. So give me a second while I pull up. Oh, that didn't. While I pull this article up. But it's a good question. Let's see. Oh, here. And let me just share my screen, share screen. Okay. And actually, I realized that there's another article about this that I've written. Well, I didn't write, actually. Grigor from, I think, High Growth Engineer wrote. But this was an article I wrote a while back at this point about going to these different skill sets. And I think the hard thing here is there is some dependency on the company you work at, because the company you work at, like if you work for very standard enterprise, they might tell you what gets you promoted and they might not promote you, right? Like it's just like, well, you didn't meet something that we thought you should do, and we really don't have a clear rubric, so you didn't get promoted. I think big tech is a little bit better here. They tend to have some clearer definitions of what grows you. And so, for example, in my experience, if you're a mid-level person, you're likely able to take on decent-sized projects yourself and able to complete them. You kind of should understand how long projects should take you. You should have obviously base level technical skills. Like you shouldn't be making simple mistakes anymore. And in order to kind of make that jump, and in most companies that I've worked for, you have to already basically be doing that level, right? Like you can't like be a mid-level showing the showing the potential to be senior. You'll have to already be doing senior level work before you get the promotion. It's got to be a lagging kind of indicator is the way they usually say, right? Like you have to be showing the skills and then we'll promote you. The big thing that I think you start to show is that you're able to find projects yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like, hey, are you able to find projects yourself and are you able to kind of own them? That's kind of one of the big key points that I think differentiate it. You're also probably realizing at this point you can't be the solve for every problem. You have to be able to start leaning into other teams or leaning into other people, right? Like start maybe being like, hey, I'm starting to work on projects where I might have to mentor or lead more junior engineers in this project, right? So I have to like help them upskill, but also help them know what is the standard, what we should do, and things of that nature. You also kind of start to understand the ability, like what risks will happen in any project, right? As you're delivering a project, there are risks, whether that's as simple as someone's going on vacation, that's going to slow down a project, to hey, if we pick this technology, we are limited either on one side or the other. So you're starting to think bigger picture. It's not that you can write better SQL. I mean, you should be able to write better SQL, and your SQL should be easier to read. And there are certain technical things that are better. But a lot of it has to do with that. I can now communicate with the business. I now understand the business. I can now go beyond just the technical side, and I start being able to see in other teams and see what they're doing, right? And so I think that's kind of a key point to cover when it comes down to hey, why don't you go to senior engineer? What does that mean? Like it involves you owning a lot more of your work. Again, at other companies, other than maybe big tech, it's likely different. A lot of those companies, it's like, how long have you been there? Some of them kind of use senior just as a way, like in terms of like giving you that title as a way to keep you around and not have to pay you too much more or pay you a little more and ask you to do a ton more. And so there's a ton of layers in terms of, answering in terms of how that works at different companies. But I think big tech's generally a little clearer. So hopefully that kind of answers your questions. If you have more, please keep asking those, because I do think I'll have a few points here to talk about if I don't have questions. But I see a lot of questions coming in already. So I'll let me see what this says. Well, this is, hey, Seattle data guy, how would you deal with data naming discrepancies? The company I work for has different naming conventions from our customer, and I've been using Fuzzy Wuzzy, but I've been using Fuzzy Wuzzy. I don't know. Is Fuzzy Wuzzy a library, or is that legitimate something? Is that like fuzzy logic? Oh, it is. It is. I'm like that must be like a Python. Oh my god. Hold on. I'm now freezing. That's hilarious. I computer side to freeze. Oh. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Let me click out. I have too many windows open probably, so let me just click out some of these. That's on me. I have too many windows open, and then I wonder why I'm frozen. Okay. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so funny that you're using Fuzzy Wuzzy. I hate any form of fuzzy logic because it's just generally not great. Usually the way people handle any sort of like naming discrepancy issue, you can use kind of something like Fuzzy Wuzzy or whatever fuzzy logic implementation you're using as your initial layer, right? Like it can kind of check things initially, and then you will have to go in and manually create lookup tables. Like that's just where, if you've ever haven't heard of a lookup table, it's just exactly what it sounds like, which means here's value one, here's our standardized value, and let's make it standard. And then your goal is to make sure that you have customers that then don't change it. But yeah, generally most fuzzy logic solutions I've found never are great, and will get things wrong enough times that I can't rely on it. So I mean, I'm curious what your experience is here, but yeah, do let me know if it's working enough, because usually you just have to hard code like, here's value one, here's the value that I want, because then you're 100% sure it's accurate. It's one of those things. But let's see. Can a data platform engineer be considered an evolution of the data engineer? I guess sort of. Kind of like what's the Pokemon? Eevee, is that the one that you go and you bring different stones to, and depending on the stone you bring, gives you different types? In that regard, it's kind of a split. It's just a difference. And again, always different companies are going to be different. Are there any good paying jobs with key focus in Airflow? I mean, what's good paying? I guess is the key point. Where do you live? There's a lot of layers there. In the US, yeah, there's jobs that have Airflow or similar things, but I wouldn't ever try to pick a tool just because it pays well. It's just my feeling. So this is a good funny point. But do you notice a difference in career trajectory between heavily technical data engineers versus data engineers that have deep subject matter expertise? Yeah, I mean that's why I think a lot of people call, there's like analytics engineers and data engineers. I think that was just a natural split that's always existed. Like you're kind of calling out here, where it's like there are the very technical data engineers, and there's usually the more business focused ones. Some places call that something, some places don't. Right, analytics engineers, analytical engineers. Um, but yeah, I mean they're kind of different in some ways. But you can always probably dabble in between depending on how skilled you are technically. Any long-term goals on how to solve this? Oh, okay, this was just your question earlier. Okay, let me know if that was helpful or if you still need more. How does one move from technical support for DE into a legit developer? I'm I'm curious what you mean here. I mean, the big thing you have to do is start developing pipelines. So if you can start pushing into, like, if you're already working as a DE sort of, but like more from like a maintenance standpoint, if there's a development project you can get on or be the tester for or something, to push into that, and that's generally the way I'd recommend that, right? Like you really got to try to move laterally in a lot of companies. So I think there's opportunities there. You just have to ask for it. If you haven't asked for it, ask for it. Do certificates help you become more senior? I don't think so, right? Like again, being technical is like you're never. I don't think there's really like a ceiling of like, oh, you're too technical now. So you can always add more technical skill. But at a certain point, it doesn't help you grow to a more senior level, right? Just because you have more skills, if you don't know where to implement those skills or how to benefit the business more with those skills, you're not more useful, right? Like you are more useful in some ways because someone can tell you to do other things, but someone still has to tell you to do things. I have a client right now, or yeah, I've had a few clients in the past where it's always like, they have a desire for some to hire someone, but they don't want to have to tell them which projects to take on, right? Like they're like, look, we need them to kind of be the ones that help us take on that work and figure out what projects exist. And I think that's something that, when you think about being more senior, has to exist. It's like you have to be able to figure out what projects to take on. I really understood what you mean by defining projects, but from my perspective, I work in an org where it isn't possible to do so. Service-based org, so teams are constructed as per need. Yeah, and I think this is often a challenge, right? Like you're kind of more of this like IT center, likely where you get tickets in, and so I'd have to know more about the company here, right? Like there's a lot more layers here. Earlier, for anyone who doesn't know, the question was asked about how to grow to be more senior. If you're in a service-based org, um, if you can do anything in terms of like set up your own projects or deliver value in your own way and take ownership, that's one sometimes option. Like, hey, you know what? There. I see this opportunity. I think I could deliver something here. Either one, I'm going to do this without telling anyone, which that just depends on how much help you need, or if you did this without telling anyone, if you get fired. Um, if that's the case, then tell someone and see if you can use your free time to do it. Honestly, I just you tell someone, but again, there's a lot of context I need to know to answer this question well. But it never hurts to ask and be like, hey, I'd like to work on this. I think it's worth doing because of these reasons. I think it would drive this value for the business, even in a service-based org. But again, every company is different. I'm not going to say that is your situation. Your manager, your director, your organization, and that will all play a role in like how easily you can have this conversation, which then, impacts it. If you feel like you can't have these conversations and you can't, like you're limited on growth, then the question becomes, do you change companies, right? Like, is it time to start looking for a different company? So that's where I kind of am at. Hi, to progress in my career, do you think it's important to learn Apache Iceberg? I'm reading about it and suspect it would be a standard to the industry's future. Thoughts on it? Don't know where you currently are. I don't like. It's good to know what technologies are out there. it's good to know how those technologies can help solve problems. I think you still need to understand how to solve those problems more generally, over figuring out how a tool kind of fits the problem, if that makes sense. Um, I don't think learning a new tool set makes you more senior, after a certain point. Like at a certain point, yes. Like there's like this, in junior and mid level, I think you should be spending a ton of time getting your baseline skills down, learning maybe a few specific technologies, after you've kind of built your baseline skills. And then as you'll kind of be adding new technologies as you're a senior, right? Like, does a senior person know? Like, do senior data engineers right now know Iceberg? No. Well, some of them know. Does that make them not senior? No. Right. Like, that's not what makes them senior. It's not the technologies that they know. It's how. Well, it's not just the technologies that they know. It's how they actually go about implementing the skills that they have as well. So, again, I don't know your background and your total skill sets, but that's what I'd say. Don't pick a technology thinking that makes you more senior. I think depending. I don't know if this is less of a question. I think. Yeah. So this is earlier. I answered a fuzzy logic question, and this is the way I view fuzzy logic in general. And everyone wants there to be a better way. I've not seen it. Like, I remember the first time someone told me, is like, hey, use this. It was like it was SQL Server. Someone was like, I don't remember if it was like a function, but it was like some sort of like fuzzy logic ability. And they're like, oh yeah, you can just use it and it'll work great. This person had more of like a technologist approach where they just see new technology and then they use it because they think they read an article and trust everything that it says. And I used it and I was so frustrated. I tried, because I think they gave you like multiple algorithms you could try. I tried different levels of like how much it would match. And no matter what I did, it just was like, it's never good enough. Because if something is even, remotely close to a different word, even sometimes if it just starts with the same letter and ends with the same letter, you have issues. So I've always found that at best, fuzzy logic can kind of help speed things up, but you will have to manually create a table that is your lookup table. It says, hey, this value means that value. There's a few, like maybe there's a few, trying to think if there's any AI libraries that I've used that are better, but fuzzy logic in particular, I don't think I've ever found to be good. But again, someone correct me if I'm wrong. I've never, but let's see, maybe there's some other one here. Okay, we got a video. Secondly, let's see what this one's. Yes, we haven't been trying, but so many. Oh, this. Okay. Now I'm saying, okay, we're putting this all together. So Andrew Vang was given some tips here, or not Andrew, Muhammad was given some tips to Andrew. How force the users. Yeah, the goal is to try to get users to fix the data. An example of this, of like trying to match. Actually, let me put up this in thing. Let's go Excel draw. So basically, what currently the problem is that they're talking about, right? Like, is you have let's say you have maybe like different departments, and in one company you have it called marketing, sales, whatever. So department names. Oh, actually, this is probably department. Let's say your what are standard departments, and then so you have marketing, sales, and then someone else on their other team or someone in a different company has mark. Maybe they, like, for some reason abbreviated things or name them slightly differently, and so now you have to basically create a lookup table that again walks this over. And generally, this is the most reliable way. Whenever I've done this for companies, right, like this is kind of what you're stuck doing. It's a pain. I worked for a company where we basically would just create standardized reporting for, I don't know, 100 plus customers. And we had to do this for every one of them. They would send us things. They would send us basically their values for whatever we were trying to aggregate on, whatever department or something. And then we would have to crosswalk them because it just, that is going to be the most reliable way. Let's see. Can you tell me about an interesting problem that you solved recently? Interesting. I always find this, like, for me at this point, interesting is connected more to either business or dollars. And I say that as an example. I recently had a project where a client, what was it? They had another consultant come in and build their data infrastructure. That consulting group built it on their own cloud, which they shouldn't have done. That consulting group then decided to charge a monthly fee for that client to like use the technology that was built for them. And it was not a small amount, right? I guess if it's $1,000, that's really bad and that's not great. But you'd probably deal with it. This was considerably more. The argument being that the consulting company felt like they put in proprietary technology into their solution. They called me in just to basically look at the solution, look at what they were getting. So I couldn't even look at the technology. Obviously, I had no ability to look internally, but look at what they were doing and say, hey, can you replicate this? And is it unique, right? Like, is it unique? And if we wanted to replace this and get rid of this, how much would it cost? And basically, I came in and was able to do that. And they were paying like $35 or more $1,000 a month to this consulting group. And I said, oh yeah, no, what they're doing is actually kind of like what I'm talking about here. Is kind of, they're just doing this like basic ingestion, then standardization, like you see here, and then doing adding in some layers of logic. And that's really it. And you could definitely do this. It could be cheaper. You could probably be doing this for like a third of the cost yourself. And that was the goal of the CEO in this case, was like, I want to hire another developer, but like if I'm paying $35,000 a month, to this external company, I can't hire another developer to build new things. And they're literally, that's the crux of our business. And so to me, that's an interesting problem, right? Like, I think sometimes people want interesting problems to be like, I took 1 million terabytes and figured out how to process it quickly, which is a valid, interesting problem if it's connected to some business outcome. And so I think that's what I find interesting, is like ways that where I'm like, hey, I can prove that this works. Here's the path you can take to get there. And then they went on that and built that out instead. So I think those are interesting problems where there's like a very clear, helpful business outcome. The other ones were like, building like fraud detection and having that fraud detection work immediately and things of that nature. But yeah. This is okay. So this is kind of one of those interesting points, right? Is there a point where you can't move from a technical track to leadership? Have you seen a staff DE move to head of data? What did they do? One of the hard things here, right, is I have to like move myself away from thinking about, let's say, like Facebook, which is the last full-time role I had, because if you know anything, Facebook basically treats it that, I think I want to say, and I'm a little rusty on my Facebook, what do you call it, job levels, but I want to say, okay, you're not gonna let me grab this. Sorry, I just want to grab some text from somewhere. Okay, because I hate that other text. Oh gosh. Okay. So basically, Facebook has, right, IC5 or E5, depending if you're in data, you're in IC5. If you're not considered engineering, so IC5, IC4, and these are individual contributor roles. So these are basically these are non-leadership. And what's nice is then you go to M0, I want to say, at IC5. So when you're a senior engineer, you can actually just make this stretch over here. And they do provide training to try to make that better for you. So it's not just a like very clunky switch. But then if you're an IC6, which is when you start getting to that staff level, you can go into M1, I want to say. And I could be wrong. Someone can remind me if I'm doing this correctly, but I want to say it's IC5 to M0 and then IC6 to M1. And so, and you can go back, right? Like, hey, if you're like, hey, I want to go back, you can be like, hey, I didn't like this. Okay, now you're going to be a staff level engineer. I think that makes sense, and I think that's how it should operate. Some companies have a hard time doing that. What do you do in order to? I mean, most of the time you have to have some sort of ability to be a lead, right? Like you should hopefully be a technical lead of some kind. So if you're like a staff engineer and you're like leading teams, then that switch is easy, or you can switch companies and kind of show that you've managed people by being a technical lead. But yeah, you're going to do something. You've got to show some way that you can manage people, because that's the biggest thing. Is like, it's one thing to manage projects, it's another thing to manage people, right? Like you can get projects from A to Z. It's another thing to grow people. It's another thing to manage people. Those are completely different things. Let's see. I'm trying to answer all these, but there's a lot of questions. So if I skip, I apologize. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. So I'm gonna, how do you correlate my exposure from Snowflake to Azure? I have no exposure to Azure, but 2 years of this is so. How do I correlate my exposure from Snowflake to Azure for an interview tomorrow? So my question here would be, are they going to ask you questions about Azure? One, I'd be ready to like have some understanding of Azure, right? How does Azure's data warehouse options compare to Snowflake, right? Like, what are the gotchas? And I'm sure there are articles about that, right? Like, that's what you want to talk about. I'd also focus less on the technology and more on like, hey, this is how I built data warehouses. This is how I've driven outcomes for the business, right? You want to understand where your gaps are. You don't have to fill them right now. I'd be able to tell them, hey, I've looked into Azure, right? Like I've done my research. Here's what I understand. Here's what I think is similar. Here's what I think is different. Here's what I'm going to do within the first 30 days to make sure that if I jump in, I know enough, to be helpful. Because that's the biggest thing. Is like they don't want to have to spend time training you, right? And they don't have to wait 6 months for you to be at a level that they can ask you to do things. So you need to be able to say like, I already have a plan, right? Like the big thing that will block you is the fact that they're going to look at you and say, you don't have Azure experience? Man, I mean, it means we have to spend a little more time waiting for you to get ready. Would we prefer hiring someone else? And yes, you can argue that, yeah, they're similar, they're the same thing, but that's what people see. So you have to like figure out how do you fight that what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for here? That negation? No, that's not the word I'm looking for. Like that, I'm stumped on the word right now, but you should be able to have a point or a plan ready to kind of answer that point that they're going to make. Yes, that's a good question. Thirdly, how do you think we can implement a project that can add value to your CV? I usually see projects on YouTube, yours too, that I never finished. I apologize. That don't drive impact and are very basic. How can I add value in big data? And one, big data is hard to get data for. If you want to add some value, or like one, I'd say find a topic you enjoy. This is sometimes a mistake I make. I just look for open APIs, and then I realize I don't enjoy the data, or something of that nature. So one, find a topic you enjoy. Two, find some data that's not necessarily that clean. I think there's a lot of data sets that exist that you can find value with if you deliver, but you have to think about it. I saw someone use, I want to say they like basically, I don't remember what they use, but they use something to scrape like YouTube, like the text in a YouTube video, and then summarize that video and then like put that out on a website. And like that's not necessarily like a complex data project, but like there's a little value there, right? Like if someone wants to like find some summarized videos, that would be something that could be of interest. I think another similar example that I've given maybe more than once is there's like a ton of legal data that exists in the form of PDFs of the changing legislation that exists for a state or a region that the US puts out publicly. I know companies that actually literally have built an entire company around this idea where you you scrape, you track all of these bills. They change over time, like as they're putting these bills into places. You scrape that data, figure out when they change, track all that information, and then you can think, hey, what would someone that maybe is interested in the specific legislation want to track about this? They'd want to track about who's on it, like how often are these people maybe pushing these types of bills. You'd maybe want to track when changes happen and what types of changes happen, because you'd want to give people that information if they're trying to figure out how it impacts their company. Like if they're a healthcare company and there's a bunch of legislation coming out towards healthcare, how does this new data impact it? It doesn't have to always be numbers, right? Like data comes in all shapes and sizes. So I'd find something that you care about and put together a project around that. There's a lot of data that exists. There's not a lot of good data that exists in a structured format in APIs or something like that. So you've got to be a little more creative. And that's why it's making a video around a project takes time. And then making something that's even more valuable takes even more time. So it's easy to make basic videos. It's very, I say it's easy. I still haven't finished one, but it's easier. It still takes time to make a basic video. It takes if I have to build a project that has value, I might as well build something for myself and then, I don't know, try sell it or something of that nature. So that's kind of how I feel there. Okay, so they're having a chat with Andrew. So this is just funny. This has been a continuing, I think, chat. Numerous issues downstream. Started losing client. Oh no. Yeah, man, been there. It created numerous issues. I'm enjoying your guys' conversation here. Coming from a BI role, what are the projects that I need to branch to get into data engineering? The big thing is probably around data warehousing and data pipelining if you've already been doing some BI stuff. So you're going to have to learn to program, you're going to have to learn SQL. I assume you have some SQL. And automation of some kind. So you can add something like Airflow. You can build your own basic kind of pipelining system as well. You don't have to use Airflow. I actually have a video coming out talking about how everyone just ends up rebuilding Airflow, which this diagram is kind of part of. I was talking through how these are the methods I've seen a lot of people write their pipelines, is they'll just kind of they'll have a scheduler of cron, main.py, and then they'll just call a bunch of methods, or they'll call a bunch of they'll run a bunch of modules that are just folders that are then just in themselves call a bunch of scripts and SQL scripts. And then eventually they're like, oh, I should just build Airflow. But that's just an ongoing joke for me that everyone ends up rebuilding Airflow. Okay, DE with experience 1 year. Is Spark that important and necessary to learn? I work as a data engineer, but didn't need to use it until now, but I always see it in job descriptions. Spark has definitely become very prevalent, right? And the challenge here is it's in different forms, right? You could be using it via Databricks, or you could be using it, via EMR or something like that. I'd say it's good to know. I think it's interesting to learn, right? Because Spark is one of those things that came around, I want to say 2012, on top of Hadoop. And I think it's always good to have at least a good understanding of the underlying engine, but at the same time, you can, most of it, you'll end up running either via SQL or Scala or PySpark. And then the question just becomes how much do you understand, how do the joins work and things of that nature, and how can you avoid issues when joining. I would definitely, if you were to pick a skill you had to learn, and if you already have SQL, Python, all your basics down, you're comfortable in the command line, I think Spark's definitely one worth adding, because it's prevalent enough that there's value in knowing it. Especially if you're going for new jobs. So I think it's one of those things that's there's enough weight behind it that you will likely run into it at many companies in one format or another, right? Whether that's Spark in EMR or in Databricks, you're going to run into it enough that it's worth knowing. Thanks for answering some questions. How were you able to move from a traditional stack, SSAS, SQL Server, to a more modern stack? Well, I think the easy thing is that in many ways, the more modern stack is easier, right? Or they've taken a lot of consideration from some of these prior solutions, and tried to make things easier. Usually the weird thing, the hard, annoying challenges between the newer tools is sometimes they don't talk as well with each other. At least with Microsoft, you had all the components you needed, and they all talk to each other. So you had to use Microsoft Stack, but at least they kind of all talk to each other. You use like PowerShell or something like Glue. It was a pain, but it worked. I've definitely had that. I think the way it works is the fact that as long as you have good SQL programming and data warehousing skills, what tool you use matters a little less, just a little less. I will say I did have a hard time when I interviewed for Amazon the first time because I didn't have Redshift experience, and then they were a little bit frustrated, which I found funny because I'm like, you guys made Redshift. Why do you want me to have Redshift experience? Just teach me how to use Redshift. But eventually, your skill set, like if you have a good broad skill set and a good baseline of technical skill set, the stack you've used will matter a little less. And honestly, SSIS and SQL Server still are very, very prevalent. I still run into it a lot with clients. I have like 2 clients with it right now. A lot of people still use it. You're gonna have to be more specific. Need you to really talk about analytics engineering. Feel free to, if you have something more specific there, like what is it? Is it going to be I'll just need a little more. Give me some thoughts there. Yeah, I think I kind of have some feelings here. I don't know about AWS, but like in general, like there's some limitations I feel like, but let's see. I'm curious so I'm under my first contract with a consumer electronics company. What should I focus on to maximize this opportunity and be valuable when I hit the job market? Still in school. One, congrats, you've got a project. Um, I would try to make sure you work on things that you can talk about, right? Work on projects that you can articulate the value of. So when you put it on your resume, it's not just like, hey, I worked on this thing. It's like, hey, I drove this value by doing project XYZ. Because I think that's more valuable than saying I use these tools. Now you're still early in your career, so it matters a little less. That's definitely more important as you go even beyond that. One of my notes that I wrote down about this talk or about this live I wanted to write about or talk about was you eventually have to start being picky with projects. Like you don't want to just work on any project because then that's part of your resume and you only have so much, right? Like you only have so many years to build that up and before you go to the next job, and you want to make sure you've built up a resume that really shows off your skills. And so you have to start eventually being picky with projects. Early on, it matters a little less. You're more focused on like build up your technical skills, deliver solid code, have people that would talk about you. I think it's another big thing is like make sure you build a network while you're there. Because one of those people could leave and they could hire you somewhere else. So, and also, I don't know if they'll give you a job offer afterwards, but if they can give you a job offer afterwards, that's always good too, right? Like you always want a returning offer. Would you say it may be better to say use Lambda functions, cloud instead of Airflow if data is very small? Would an Airflow fully managed instance not be more expensive in this case? Yeah, so this is I'd say it's less about how big the data is and more how complex your processes are. I mean, data probably plays a little bit of a role because I think you do get eventual timeouts, but I do think there is a point where it's like, look, if you're just doing like one basic ingestion script into whatever Postgres or Snowflake via Lambda, maybe consider into Snowflake, and you don't know if you should put it in Lambda or Airflow. If you're just starting out, maybe it just goes on Lambda because it's just one script and like that's it. Once you start like having dependencies, having tons of pipelines that need to run all at once, then you can start looking at it and be like, okay, would Airflow make sense? Because a managed instance of Airflow, I want to say, don't quote me, I haven't actually run this in a while. I want to say the smallest Airflow instance I've ever run on AWS that's managed costs about $300 to $500 a month. So it's not like that's cheap for some companies, and that's very expensive for most of us who are just running that for fun, right? So it gets very expensive very quickly, and you know, then just have a Lambda that costs you like whatever pennies to run. Is the analytics engineering just about DBT, or is it bigger? I think even DBT will tell you that analytics engineering is not about DBT. Really, the way I view analytics engineering is they did what a lot of like, and what DBT did in capturing the idea is oftentimes something exists in the zeitgeist or in a space, and no one captures the moment. No one captures that like concept well. So I always explained data engineering as kind of two sides, or at least a spectrum, where like one side they're very technical, and the other side, you know, you have more of the business focused, SQL focused kind of data engineers who like do data modeling. Analytical engineering or analytics engineering really just captured that split and called it something, and gave it a name. And I think that's the biggest thing that really happened is like they're like, hey, we see that this is happening. We'll just give it a name. The same way the medallion architecture that Databricks calls is really, to me, just the same as like raw staging production. I'm sure there are people who would argue that, but it really is just that thing that we've had forever. They just gave it a name, and because of that, you know, they get value out of that. Giving it a name captures mind share, and there's value in having mind share, and things of that nature. So that's kind of, I feel like it already existed. You've just now again given it a name, given it some tooling. DBT was smart because they attach themselves to it, you know, and again, they get value by attaching themselves to it. If I'm learning Spark, how much should I focus on learning Hadoop, Pig, and Hive? Unless you live somewhere, there are certain countries that I think because Hadoop and things of that nature and Hive are still being managed, usually offshore, because it's expensive to manage these things. Unless you live somewhere where you are that country that or countries that get offshore to that type of work, I wouldn't learn it, right? Again, there are countries that's just where the work gets offshore to because companies in the US don't want to pay for it. It's just how it is. So I definitely see that work still existing. It just is put into different places. In your opinion, what tools show that developers thought about the developer experience instead of building more impressive demos? What tools? I guess I'm a little confused. So are you talking about the analyst maybe? Maybe if you're referring to like analyst experience. I'm curious how the developers get in here, because the developers are building for the developers. Yeah, who are the developers building for? I imagine it's the analyst, but let me know. So sorry, someone just asked Postgres and AWS versus Redshift. Guess it depends. Yeah, especially when the question is this broad. It's like, what is it for? Are you doing a transactional database? Are you doing, you know, I'm assuming you're doing analytical, but it's a very broad question. Let's see. Was this DBT Labs just did a partnership with Tableau? Do you have experience with DBT Labs? And how do you think it's a good tool for database development? I do not have any experience with DBT, by the way. Yeah, I've worked with DBT. There are, I mean, like any tool, it again kind of came around and solved specific problems. People were already, actually, I kind of call it out here in the video that I have here. So like one of the ways that I've seen people build their pipelines, I'm just gonna okay. One of the ways I've seen people build their pipelines is they'll have, again, a scheduler. It'll call some main.py. That main.py will go to some folder with a bunch of folders in it that will have like HubSpot, Salesforce, some other transforms in it. In that, you might have like an extract.py script, but you also might have all these SQL script. And all this main.py is doing is saying, hey, run whatever exists in this folder and run everything in that folder. If it's SQL, run it this way. If it's, whatever, run it that way. Maybe they give it an order by putting a number in front of the file name. DBT kind of took that and they're like, hey, we know people are doing this, and more with transforms in particular, or we know the other way people are doing this, which is the way I remember seeing this for a long time, right? And now I have to remember how you execute a stored procedure. Was X like whatever stored procedure or run transform underscore sprock, and you would just have these stored procedures that would have a bunch of stored procedure calls in it. right? It would just have store procedure after store. And they're like, okay, all these people are running a bunch of SQL scripts. They don't have version control added in. They don't have all this stuff added in. So what if we built all that and wrapped it all around it? So they captured that problem and built a system around it. And now there's actually a bunch of dbt alternatives you can look up. There's a good article from Green Data Mountain Solutions by Jeff. I don't think it's like you don't need dbt. There's a lot of companies there are plenty of companies that use it. There are plenty of companies that don't. I think you can get away with you might get away with never actually using it, especially I think at enterprise. So I think did dbt also just partner with Azure though? I think it might have. I want to say they announced that. So, but I also think it's pretty easy to pick up. I think that's the other thing. It's like it's pretty easy to pick up. You just need to understand a few key concepts, such as like adding in macros, how those macros can be helpful. Being able to track lineage is helpful and point to sources and use Jinja. There's a few other things, obviously, but like as long as you kind of know that general gist, you'll figure it out pretty quickly. So, yeah, I think the more important skills to have is like good data modeling, good data warehousing skills, and then the tools you use to implement it will always change. Let's see. I think it's not only about dbt. Yeah, modeling, whether dbt, other tools. I know on yeah, exactly. Going back to analytics engineers, not just about dbt. I'm pretty well versed in Alteryx through my BI position. How much of the skill set is transferable to Airflow? I imagine it's not going to be a very easy, like it's not a one-to-one. Airflow, I don't think Alteryx, maybe you can write some code and automate tasks that way, but Airflow has its fair share of pain points, whether it be passing data in between or tasks or things of that nature, although they're trying to make that easier with data sets. But yeah, it's just if you're not accustomed to working in a purely coding framework, there's just a difference, right? That's why I'd always tell people don't focus on frameworks or libraries or tooling. Focus on the bigger picture as well, right? Like you can use these tools, but I'd first learn how to code, how to write SQL, how to be good at data warehousing. Okay, we got that. It depends question. In data engineering, everyone's interested with the stack. Yeah, this actually kind of goes with the next question as well. No one wants to learn system design. It's important, or it's the most important. Yeah, I think it's always been a little bit about stack, or if not stack, what paradigm and approach you're using. On one side, we're people that enjoy technology, right? Like that's who we are. We want to know, like, what could this be better? Could we make our lives better? And certain solutions make our lives better, but everything in like our world is a trade-off, right? Like you pick one solution over another, you're getting a trade-off. Somewhere there's a trade-off in general. Are there now, are we slowly maybe building solutions that are better? Sure. But everything is always a trade-off. Hey, migrating to a new solution that might be better, well, that's a trade-off. We have to take time to migrate, spend 6 months to a year, depending on how big the company is, maybe 2. And we're not going to be developing net new things. We're going to have to be just developing on this one, and we might fail. So is it worth whatever that new technology is to migrate to it? And sometimes the answer is no, right? Like sometimes it's better to wait a longer period of time till you get a better technology. And I think that's part of system design too, is like you have to make these trade-offs. You have to make these calls. It's why I don't like being super specific about like, this is the best tool in the world. Because every tool I've ever worked with has trade-offs. Like there's always something where it's like, oh, I wish I could do this. And especially if it's like a GUI based tool, like I wish I could do this other thing. I can't write this code because it's, GUI based. And so, yeah, that's why I'm not like someone that's going to say this is the best tech stack ever, because I think you're going to find it to be very different for very different people and very different companies and very different circumstances. So, but I think everyone wants an opinion these days. Let's see. Hi, I'm a senior data engineer in my company. For taking the next level, do you think I necessarily need to go through direction taking a management role? So I would need to know what company you're working for, or at least how your company is structured. I kind of referenced this earlier. Let's see. I think if I go back, I talked about, this kind of stack here, like this junior, mid-level, senior staff. Can you even see all that? Oh, it's kind of covered by some of you, but staff's at the bottom. The problem with certain companies is they don't follow a very clear rubric. And to be a staff engineer means you might not get paid as much, right? At big tech companies, you'll get paid as much as your equivalent management role. And nowadays, I think they're even trying to get rid of some of the management because they added so much. Because again, people want to grow, right? Like we have this desire to grow. We want to grow. And then the only option to grow is management. And then we do it just because we have to. And I think Alex Friedberg from Alex the Analyst talked about how he would probably not have done it if he were to go back again, because for him, he just likes doing the work, and managing takes you away from doing the work often, right? Like you're having to do a lot of stuff. So if you want to grow, the options are like maybe hopefully your company has staff level engineer. If not, you can look at other companies. And if not, you have to ask yourself, do you want to manage people? Because that's where your time will be spent. It's one of the reasons I haven't necessarily grown out my consulting business, because I know then I become an agency and then I don't do the work, and I kind of like the work. But yeah, I mean, this is something you got to ask yourself in terms of like where you want to grow. Do you want to be management? If not, does your company offer senior level? If it doesn't, do you have to switch? I don't know. I kind of just do lives. So the question is, do I do lives at this time? I just kind of do lives when I have time. I just have been feeling it recently. I've wanted to answer questions, give people some thoughts. It's fun. So I'm happy to kind of share some thoughts and answer some questions. Especially after I've got 100K, it's kind of cool. And it's kind of cool to, talk to y'all. Oh, this is very specific. I probably won't be helpful here, but I'm going to read this question because I'm curious. Currently struggling with processing large Tiff satellite data with custom built Python packages. I'm using Airflow and running these processes with Docker operator, Python operator. Any tips? I don't know what the problem is. What would the problem here be? I don't know how you're processing this. If it's a performance issue, I would and when you say custom built Python packages, do they not have some that work? I don't know if, I have to know a lot more here, because it's like, is it performance? Is it that, how are you processing it? I need to look up Tiff to make sure I'm thinking the right thing. But I'm worried if I freeze, guys, I apologize. Tiff satellite data. Let me just see if I'm thinking about this right. Oh, okay. Tag image. Yeah, I am. A comment, huh? Yeah. So I imagine you're doing, images. I'd have to know a lot more of what you're trying to do with those images. Because this is definitely probably a solved problem. I wonder if anyone has a good article on this. I'm going to write this down, Tiff, and how to process Tiff. Okay. How to become a machine learning engineer using Databricks. Is interview standard machine learning specialization good for the starters? Please mention a pathway. I don't know if Databricks is alone, right? Is enough to make you a machine learning engineer. I imagine, yes, you'll have to get some basics in terms of, looking at Stanford's machine learning specialization. I don't know if that really makes you is enough of a bridge there. I don't know what your background is. At Facebook, for example, they often, if you had MLE engineers, they were generally software engineers that were very focused on machine learning. So it wasn't like I'm a data scientist. It was no, we want software engineers because you're going to be implementing code. And so I think that's often can you implement machine learning code into production is generally the question. So I don't know if I don't think a specialization is going to be enough to do that. It gives you maybe the baseline understanding, but I think it's going to really come down to you doing the work and trying to find projects that have at your job that get you that work. I don't know. Where's the final thought? Final thought. Did you post a final thought? Okay. Final thought. Thought there was a question. Been a data analyst and starting to learn DEEK. Do I need to install Airflow, Snowflake, etc. on my machine? Can I use cloud or Docker image? Well, Snowflake, you don't download, right? Like you just have in the cloud. Airflow, you could definitely, I mean, I'd spin it up on a basic Docker instance just to get used to it. But usually, most places, someone else is probably managing that, like a platform engineer. But it can be fun if you're interested in learning about it, right? Like it really comes down to what do you want to learn. If you're really just trying to figure out how to work with Airflow, just use a managed service. If you have the time, then I say get comfortable with Docker. It can be fun. Fun in quotes. You're gonna have some problems. Although I think there's a few Docker files you can find. I don't know where they are. That make it pretty easy. So the question is, how do I approach project-based learning? So one, I really think if you want to approach project-based learning, you should design the project, right? You should find a data set you like. You should ask questions about that data set. You should define what the end goal should be. Like, is it a dashboard? Is it going to just be, you sending yourself a text message about how many numbers you've aggregated together, how many reports you've aggregated? And you should just build it, right? Like you shouldn't wait for someone else to define what the project is. Like if you're waiting for a project, like in a weird way, it's like if you're the type of person that waits for someone else to tell you what the project should be, again, going back to like, are you gonna be a senior engineer? You're never like you have to be able to bridge that gap and just tell yourself, this is the project I'm gonna make. I'm gonna like make something happen out of nothing, so to speak. And that's I think kind of a good point of it. I wonder what this is for. Yeah, don't do it. You end up sitting in meetings all day. Where was this for? What question is this answering? What is the Hello World project of data engineering? That's, I mean, you're going to learn Python, so normal Hello World will be, one. Um, I guess Hello World, maybe not Hello World, but more of what do you call it? The iris problem. I like to say that this is the iris problem. If you ever do a data model and it's just like your straightforward like sales or orders data model is what I always think of. It's like the iris data set, right? Like it's like we get it, right? Like you got order factor in the middle, you got your departments, you got your customers, you got all that around it. It's always going to be the same. This video is public, so you should be able to find it. Hey, Ben, have you read E-Myth? Highly recommend it. Might help you deal with what to do next with your consulting service. All right, I'll have to check it out. Good day. I was recently approached to work for a company on-prem, SAS and SSAS. There are way more growth opportunities at this new company, but I'm worried about the data tech stack. Um, yeah, I do say that like you shouldn't worry if you're working on these stacks because you can always move away from them. Um, but I'd always try to push for companies that are at least trying to change and doing new things. So it would depend on what your current company looks like, right? If your current company is using the same stack, obviously switch. If you can find another company, right? Like, I mean, if you're getting this interview, hopefully you can find other interviews, and I would almost try to push there. But I'll add one more caveat. If your current role, you feel like the smartest person in the room, and you see this company, and they do have really smart people, like you feel like you're going to work with smart people, I really hope you don't get bait and switched, but assuming that you're going to work with these really smart people, I would go work with them as long as again there's some coding involved. You didn't say any coding. I'm hoping that there's like some programming involved and some custom work because I think that's also important. Like I don't like the idea of just doing drag and drop. Like drag and drop is okay if it's part of my work, but I need to be writing code and things of that nature. I think this is for something where it's talking about growing, and so yeah, this is kind of my approach to it too. Like try to work with your boss. This is interesting. Do you think DE can have its rails, a full stack, highly opinionated framework that is good enough when it comes to scaling and focused on development speed? I mean, I think, yeah. I think the challenge is I wonder which group of engineers is more divisive. Like we just have so many opinions. I think Joe Reese just posted about how. Well, what did he post? He posted something really funny about something like this, where where he said something. I thought it was hilarious. Let me get this because I thought it was really funny, and very apt. Here we go. Let me post this here. So Joe Reese posted this, and I thought it was very funny. So the fights are so vicious because the stakes are so small. So it often feels like that can sometimes be the debates we have in the data world, where it's like we're fighting over very small minutia, but we want to be so right. Hold on, I got to plug my computer in. I just realized. Oh, good, it's right here. So I think that's something that I've often felt is like we're so stuck on some details that we can't get out of our own way half the time. So, I mean, details are important, but it's hard to get us off. But I feel like every tech world or tech kind of space has their problems. So this is a more data science question. Let me just. This is like everyone's problem, right? How to deal with executives who don't buy the insights or experiments for their data? Is there a way to really make them convinced because the data says so? I think one, there's that classic. I think there's that saying from Jeff Bezos: if the anecdotes and the data disagree, the anecdotes are probably right. So there's two kind of things. One, you need to create the incentive for the for the executives to understand why it's good for them to change their behavior, right, or to take a different path, right. Um, they need to see that by going down what you're describing, there is a benefit for themselves, and it's safe and guaranteed. I think Moneyball is a good example of that too, right? Like they really had to push for this idea that, hey, the data says we don't need to buy star players. We can buy players that are maybe, just getting on first base a lot. Which I oversimplified that, and it probably is not 100% correct, but that's the gist, right? They had this theory, and they had to, and everyone was like, that's not the way we've ever done it. So why would we do it differently? And so you do have to kind of be willing to stick your neck out and go out on your shield, and really sometimes have that fight. I will say sometimes there are executives that will never trust data. And then the question becomes, do you want to work for them? And do you want to switch jobs and find someone that appreciates the work that you do? Sometimes that's the answer. And then what was the last point I was just thinking? So incentivize. And then there's one other point that now I've spaced on. The other, what am I trying to think? The other option is to make sure, or not the other thing you'd want to do is make sure that you are not, I don't even know how to say it, like not overly making it so about the numbers that you miss the story. Because I think that's the other issue. Sometimes we're like, we have this one number, it says this thing. You really need to be able to drill down into it and show them the executives, and tell them a story, and not just focus on the number, but tell them the story of how this is going to change the business. Again, this won't work with every executive. Some executives, it doesn't matter. But if you can, we are human. We do respond to stories. So if you can kind of craft something that like gets them bought in, that's usually a win, right? Like you can't just be like, hey, this number says we should do X, Y, Z. There's a quote, and I don't remember who it's from. If you want to have, I think, men build or people build a boat. Don't teach them how to build boats, make them yearn for the sea. You have to like give them this like desire, which again usually comes from like some sort of storytelling or something that pushes them in that direction, right? Like, hey, if you go down this path, you could somehow get promoted, right? Like that's like, because that's what their end goal is. So you like think about their end goal and you're like, how do I craft this story that if they go down this path, that based on the numbers we've seen, we like get them to that point. So that's usually the way to think about it. We're people, we are moved by stories. We love stories. Okay. Are you really based in Seattle? Do you recommend the Google Analytics course? Wow. Love your work. Really cool video. I was born and raised in Seattle. I am no longer in Seattle. I was in SF for a little bit until, the fun 2020s. And then I did a little bit of some Airbnb-ing around, and I ended up in Denver. And I saw that after Denver was Kansas, and I was like, all right, I guess I'm stuck in Denver. So I've been enjoying Denver recently. In terms of, do you recommend Google Analytics, Coursera, or FB Data Science one? I haven't taken either the Google Analytics or the FB Data Science one, or even looked at them. So I think the other part of this would be, why do you want to look at them? Are you looking for a job, or something like that? But yeah. What are your views on Rust language? Is there a point in learning it as a DE? Anyway, I'm going to learn it for fun. I think you just nailed it on the head. Like, not everything has to be about work, right? Not everything has to be about how to make money. We need money. Like, I want to be clear. I'm not someone that says like, go work for free. Please don't. Please get paid. But when it comes to learning, I think this is one of the things that's we're starting to overly focus, I feel like, sometimes on how do I make a lot of money, which I get, as someone who's especially, I worked in fine dining, didn't make enough money if I wanted to support a family, and switched into tech around 18. Switched into tech at like 22. And so I, like, on that side, I get it, but you're in a career that in tech, you're likely going to make money. So have fun, learn some things. If you're enjoying it, just learn it for the sake of learning it. You might find a totally different project that eventually is worth doing because you've learned this new skill, and you might not. And there's skills you're going to learn that are going to maybe never be used again after you've learned it, but have some fun out there. All right, our company is moving to Snowflake, and all our databases to date have been on-prem. As I want to get into data engineering, what aspects of Snowflake should I focus on? So if you understand a basic database, you understand some bits, obviously, with Snowflake. The big thing about Snowflake is, unlike your traditional database or a lot of like systems out there, it separates storage and compute, right? Like, it has this, instead of having a shared nothing architecture, it basically separates those two things out. And so now you have what they call a virtual warehouse, which is just basically compute. And then you have your storage that just exists. And they can have copies of that storage as well. So, for example, if you've moved recently from SQL Server, if you've worked with SQL Server, you have all these little nuanced problems. The first one being, you can run out of space, right? Like, if you're on-prem, you run out of space. Snowflake doesn't have that issue. You, in theory, have infinite space, in theory. Obviously, there's a cap somewhere, but you can run it, you can make it pretty large. You also essentially have unlimited compute. So if you're used to SQL Server, you're like used to being like, okay, I can only run, this one stored procedure, and I can't run this other stored procedure because we'll lock a table down, right? And then everything blows up. So you can kind of throw most of that out the window because Snowflake kind of lets you separate those issues. And so I think that's a big paradigm shift, that you can run things in parallel. You don't have to be worried about, if this thing runs, will it lock another table? I think, let's see, what else is good to know about Snowflake. There's like little things. They can be big. Like, data sharing is nice. You do need to be worried about costs Make sure you turn your default data warehouses to the lowest amounts of time it will be on. It basically, you pay for it the way you pay for electricity. If you turn it on, it's running. If you turn it off, it's not. And then you add in a size factor. So if you use a bigger size compute or a larger size compute, you'll pay more. If you use a smaller one, you pay less. But yeah, that's at least some good initial things to understand about it. Okay, I think I've talked about this a little bit. What's your recommendation to get a promotion in DE? Let's say to go from mid to senior. It's really, in my perspective, really the big change is you need to start taking ownership of projects and finding projects that are worth doing. You need to say like, hey, I think we need to solve XYZ problem because it's costing us this much money or it's wasting this much of our time. And you're going to be wrong on some of these projects, to be clear. Have the ability to technically say why you think that is, have the ability to guide that project, lead that project, and close that project to the end. And I think that's generally a big part of it. In that, you will probably have technical things that will be difficult to solve, and you'll have to solve them, and that's another part of it. But the real kind of gist of it is you can envision a project and drive it to completion. And I think that really is part of it. And also in that, communicate to the business and convince them to do it. Can a sloppy GitHub project actually hurt your career? What would you make sure you have before you make your project public? Does this change depending on seniority? I mean, if it's early in your career, it probably doesn't matter. Like, I mean, everyone has sloppy GitHub. I think you should have a few projects half started and, not completely done well. And, it's part of learning, right? Like, are you going to sit there and try to make sure that all your code is, perfectly set up when you're just testing out new ideas and trying to learn? I think it's kind of more fun to kind of just go at it like, hey, let's learn how whatever Rust works or something. It doesn't have to be this perfect project. So I don't know if all your projects are sloppy, probably, but if like 1 out of 10 is, it's probably fine. I don't really use GitHub that frequently. All my projects have existed on so many other types of what do you call it, repos, whether it be Mercurial for Facebook, or like all my clients have their own as well. Like I'm just on so many that I've lost track. I think you missed my question. All right. Where'd it go? I was not sure if this was a question. I can't directly jump into freelancing if it's challenging to get a job. So, if this is a question, my guess is the question then be, how do I jump into freelancing if it's challenging to get into a job? I would say, like, one, you don't have to, when you're freelancing, you don't have to be going for the most complicated projects, right? Like, you're going for projects that could just be as simple as like helping someone figure out like some basic metrics in Excel. Like I've done those projects, to be clear. Like I've done very straightforward projects. I've helped a company move from Access to SQL Server. And so if you have these skill sets, and maybe you can either sell them somewhere on Upwork, or you have friends that you can, need help on a certain project, I think that's sorry, I was just looking at another question. That's always an approach. And then that kind of gives you some experience and gets you comfortable. So freelancing is hard. It's even harder if you don't have a job, but there are opportunities. And whenever, there's a few times I've actually hired freelancers from somewhere like Upwork, where I like needed a quick bit of help finishing some projects. I don't often, I'm like, do they have prior job experience? I'm generally a little less interested in that and more interested in like how their experiences were prior freelancing. Now that means you have prior freelancing experience and ratings there, but like when it comes to like hiring freelancers, especially on somewhere like Upwork, that's what I'm gonna look at. I'm like, I don't care about the school. How are you to work with? Or if you had prior jobs, how are you to work with? So, and the hard thing is you'll likely have to work a little bit cheaper to get your first few projects if you can stand out. So yeah. Hi, I am trying to break into DE as a fresh grad. I'm creating my personal projects. How complex should be a project in order to be portfolio worthy? And how many projects should I create? I would not focus on quantity. I would focus on building a project that you find fun and that you feel like you can show off and talk about. They don't have to be complex. I like building things complexly is, I think, part of the process of growing as an engineer. I think we enjoy building things with every skill that we've ever learned. I think that's very true with a lot of skill sets. I think as you get better, you look for refinement over complexity. So I would focus more on trying to build something useful versus trying to build something complex. So that would be my thought there. Is like build something that, like, if you build a interesting web app that like I can go to and see how you've aggregated things and I can click around, I think it's more interesting than you building 30 dashboards that I see none of and I'm not really curious about. Let's see. Where is this question from? Sorry, I'm not seeing. Oh, that was the analytics question. So this earlier, the part of this question that you don't see was this individual is looking for analytics jobs and they are looking at these various certificates. I think, yeah, if you had a certificate, it might not be bad. I think it'd be cooler to do your own project versus maybe doing a certificate that you can show off. Because you've got a mech eng background, mechanical engineering. I think that's interesting. If you can get internships, I would really try to focus on that. I don't remember where you said you are in the process, but if you can get an internship, do that because that will really help out. Do you have any resources, books, YouTube videos that do a great job breaking down data warehouse design versus feature engineering specifically for ML and AI inputs? Not that specific topic. That is a very, I mean, I kind of see why that topic would be there, but yeah, not that specific topic. I have studied software engineering and want to jump on the data wave. What do you think will be the most difficult obstacle when going over to data engineering? Generally, I find it's SQL. Not like SQL in itself is very basic. Working with large data sets, or not even large, just working with complex data sets, I think can get hairy. Like that's usually complexity that comes. I think I've posted about that, where it's like the complexity in data warehousing or in this complexity of SQL or difficulty of SQL doesn't come from SQL itself. It comes from the data underlying, how the data looks underneath and how you want to transform it. So yeah. Do you agree that for being able to dive deeper into DE tasks, solve complex problems, and be satisfied in general is better to work for a product company versus service company? In general, I mean, probably, right? Like you're more focused. I think there's a couple of reasons why. Service company, I assume you mean like consulting. In general, I want to say that yeah, you're gonna be able to like actually dive into a topic more. And if you're consulting, you often have to kind of just build things quickly and leave. And you have no ownership of it. You kind of just have to build it and leave, and you don't get to hold on to it. So I think that can be a little bit hard. Let's say it's a clustering project in the real world. Does the DE implement the clustering algorithm like k-means prototype in Airflow, or is it more of a data scientist to add the cluster group? So one, there's actually a lot of machine learning that goes on in Airflow. I wrote an article about this. How I think it's Riot Games. I won't say it's Riot Games. I don't remember. You can look up the article. Uses Airflow or not? Yeah, uses Airflow to kind of retrain their model. I have been the data engineer that's implemented it via not Airflow, via our own internal kind of system that we built. But in many cases, at larger companies, it'll be someone else, like the software engineer. Do you have a link to resources to study DE online or any boot camp that can help? Also, what are the latest technologies to learn? I have a 100-day kind of checklist. It's just a crash course to see where you are. It's really to make you feel like, hey, I know these skills, I don't know these skills, and then I think that's kind of nice to like check. Hold on, let me respond to this email really fast. But yeah, I think just overall, was it? that's a good way of like just getting started before you go pay for a boot camp. So, and then you can look up like 100 days of data engineering. I think you should find it. Let me just answer this email really fast. Gotta make sure I'm answering projects. All right, let's go back. Okay. The thing, answering the thing is what to do. What do I write on the resume? I feel like recruiters get scared because I'm not specialized in one. I would obviously tailor. So this question here is, give more background context. So this individual has a lot of different experiences at his job or their job, sorry. And basically they would like, what should they do? Like, how should they put it on their resume? Tailor your resume, right? Like you should have a machine learning one, a data engineering one, and whatever. And it depends on what job you want next, but that I would just focus it for whichever one it is, and make sure you highlight the various skills you did in those. No need to tell everything. Just tell them what they want to see, right? It's almost the same thing as like when you do a data analysis project, you're going to have like 30 different charts. You don't show people 30 different charts. You show them the one or two that bring your point home, right? And your point in this case is I want to be an ML engineer, right? Like that's the role I'm applying for, or a data scientist. That's the role you're applying for. No need to give them more information. There, like you said, it's going to scare them. It's going to confuse them. Give them less and let them, and guide them through. Again, I referenced story earlier. Really guide them through this story, right? The story you have here is, I am the ML engineer that will help solve your problem of hiring an ML engineer, right? Like the problem that they're facing when you think about a story and that rise and fall is they need an ML engineer because they have problems with their job. You're that person. Don't go on a bunch of bunny trails telling stories about, that time you were a data engineer. Tell them how you are an amazing ML engineer, and that's all they need to care about. This is a very general question. Any advice for people? If you can just give me a little more context in terms of what you're asking there. It's very general. How do you pick topics to make your content? Do you have a core audience in mind? I definitely struggle sometimes. Like I have so many things that I want to say, and talking about like focusing. This is my weakness. I really love making content in a few areas. I like making intro content because I like helping people get started. I like thinking more high level and talking to data leadership because I think that's really what gets the value going, right? You need to understand the technical bit just enough, and then you need to understand enough of the business to like move projects forward. And I think a lot of us don't do that well. And I'm constantly working on this one in particular because it's like, if you can't get buy-in from leadership, if you can't drive value, or be connected to the business, your technical skills won't matter. You'll just be doing whatever they ask you to do. And so that's another part. And then I also like consulting. I like talking about consulting. I like helping people breaking into it if they want. I know not everyone, it's not for everyone, but if it is for them, I want to make sure that they have the ability to get there. What do you think about this tech stack? Python, SQL, Snowflake, Databricks, DBT, and Airflow. Okay, so are these two different tech stacks or one tech stack? Yeah, this is a lot. So, look, I don't like picking favorites unless I have like specific reasonings to pick favorites. Like I will tell some people like, hey, I think Databricks is great for your company. I think Snowflake is great for your company. I think Airflow is great for your company. I think DBT is great for your company. I think Y42 is great for your company. I think Estuary is great for your company. I don't generally do that for individuals because it's like, there has to be a little bit about what you want, right? Like realize that if that these are just technologies, they will come and go. I have been burnt by Hadoop and will forever not like be a technology loyalist. But you should pick something at some point after you've built your baseline skills. So I know some people like to say like, this is my favorite tech stack. That's great. I'm glad that some people feel like this is the best tech stack. I think as someone who's seen dozens of different data infrastructure setups, it's going to be so much more dependent on, again, who the team is, what the company problems are. I mean, in some cases, some companies, I like that Joe Reese posted this on my post earlier today. Some companies that have data teams shouldn't have them. They're not being helpful, or at least not to the same extent that they have. Maybe they should simplify it down. And so it's so company dependent. And yeah, that's why I don't pick, because I will tell you if I'm working with you which one I think it is. But beyond that, it's yeah. Hopefully someday I don't like get bought out, or like, I don't have like some interesting situation where one of these companies ends up being like, will you basically only talk about us, and then I'll have to erase this someday. Hopefully that's a joke, but who knows these days. I have been learning DE and want to get in the field, but I see very few DE jobs for freshers with no experience. Any advice on how to land a job as a fresher? Yeah, so I think generally my advice is, yes, there's DE is kind of this weird, very broad skill set that requires like some analytics, some data warehousing, a lot of skills that you haven't picked up until you've worked in the industry for a little bit. So if you are trying to get it, I would say find either a data analyst position or a software engineering position, something that lets you move laterally into data engineering. That's how I've seen lots and lots of people do it, and it just works. So I'm not going to like if you see something work, I don't generally question it too much. So I've seen it work a lot. It's not that any of these skills are necessarily lower. It's just they tend to be more focused, and there tends to be more of these roles. So it's easier to break into those roles and then move laterally than it is to move in this one that's very, very specific. What does plateauing in skill set and project output look like in data engineering? That's a good question. Technically, I think, I'm trying to think, because I feel like there's like a technical side of plateauing, and there's a certain point where I always ask myself, is more tech the answer? Like, is knowing more tech the answer? And I think there's a lot of people out there who have built a really solid understanding, again, of data warehousing, Python, SQL, and data pipelines, and maybe like a handful of other things like the cloud. And then just pick up enough of the new skills that come along that they never really feel behind. And that's kind of where you don't necessarily plateau, but you're always just kind of like steadily growing, right? Like instead of like, because your initial, let me go to your initial learning. That's not what I want to do. Acceladra. Your initial learning is like, right, whatever. If you go here, and you're thinking about your ability, how much you're learning here. When your first few years, you're like going, and then somewhere here, like you find like a steady growth rate, and that's okay. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with like you steadying your growth rate, and you're not in this whatever, or you kind of go through more seasons, right? Like where maybe you go through some really fast growth, and then like some new technology comes in and you have to like learn again. So you're always kind of growing, and these are just different phases. And I think this is okay for from a technology standpoint, right? You've got this like more steady growth rate, and then you have maybe a year of really grinding in a subject. And I think that's kind of how a lot of us learn. And then on the other side, what you end up doing while you're doing this is somewhere in here, you end up learning that you're like, oh, business matters too. So as you're plateauing here, suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, business, that's important. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Yeah. Let me delete this. I wanted a pen. You want to learn about business. And then you're like having to learn about business. And then, you're having to learn about business. So here it like goes up, and then like at a certain point it has to like plateau where you're like maybe trying to learn more about technology again. So I do think there's like some ebb and flow, some back and forth. So you might feel like you're plateauing in one area, but hopefully you're picking up in another area, either business domain or business domain knowledge of like healthcare or something of that nature. So that's how I view it. How to engage in the USA market without any experience. Oh, sorry, I laughed, but it's just like, it's always hard when I see without any experience. It's like, in TI, I assume you mean IT. Is necessary to have experience in jobs in order to search jobs in the US. I mean, it's always going to be helpful, right? Like you can't, it's like saying, is it helpful to have Facebook on my resume? Yes, like it is. but it doesn't mean you can't get work. Generally, the big thing you have to do is whenever I talk to people about consulting, you have to get in front of people and you have to build trust. Those are like the two things, right? Get in front of people, build trust. So how are you going to get in front of people? Are you going to use Upwork? Are you going to use marketing? Are you going to use, content? Are you going to use et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And then how do you build trust? Trust on Upwork generally means I have to work for less money to get a bunch of good, good ratings that then I have trust that I can work for more money. Or in content, it's I put out content that shows that I'm very skilled in this specific area and I know how to get people to engage with it. And that together kind of builds. It's slower, but it works. There's other methods, but like that's what it is. You have to somehow figure out how do I get in front of people, and then how do I get those people to trust me? And I'm simplifying it, but like that's really the two things. Like if you want to simplify it down to two distinct points, and again from there are different ways you can answer that question or those problems. But how do I get in front of people, and then how do I get those people to trust me? And those are the two things you need to do. When building my first ETL project, what areas should I focus on? How long should the duration of the project be? I mean, focus on really, from my perspective, and this is because I've actually done something with Alex Freeberg that I haven't put out yet, and I need to finish looking at some videos. I really focused on being really distinct on the extract phase, the transform phase, and the load phase, just so it's very clear. So you kind of understand the difference. And in the future, if you ever do like ELT or something like that, you see the difference. And so I think it's good to do that. I would honestly just use Python on your first project. You don't have to like set up Airflow. Because it gets you comfortable with programming before you start going straight into like Airflow or Prefect or Mage or anything of that nature. And then the other thing I'd focus on is like, what is the end result you want? Because if you don't have a fun end result, it's not going to be as exciting for you. So focus on something fun. In terms of how long it should be, don't try to rush it. Really enjoy it. You only can be learning so long. And then eventually you feel like you get stuck in the do phase. I think Zach Wilson referenced this somewhere where he's like, I just feel like I'm doing and I'm not learning. And it's hard to be in this phase when you're someone who likes learning. But eventually you're expected to learn, and you have to kind of just deal with that. So I've been following you for a long time. Thank you. But this is the first time I've been able to catch you live. Thank you for your time. Where do you suggest the best place to learn SQL and Python with practices? Always your own projects, right? Like have fun, build a project. Don't feel like you have to follow anyone's videos. I will say this over and over again till my face is blue. Go find a data set you think is interesting. If you can't find a data set, make a data set. And then when I say that, I mean like there are plenty of data sets you can scrape online. Put it into a database and start asking questions of it, right? Like go list out a bunch of questions you want to answer and just do that. Like don't feel like you have to do what everyone else is doing. Have some fun with the project. Any resources on soft skills you can recommend? The recent book that I liked, and now I'm suddenly spacing on the title. Come on, brain. It's from someone who worked at Facebook, I think. And why am I spacing on the title suddenly? Let me Google this because I'm like, I know. I've literally referenced her. So I'm writing a book right now, and I literally referenced them multiple times. What was it? No, come on. I'm trying to remember the book that I read. And now I'm obviously spacing. And I reference them. And of course, let's see. I'm going to look through this. Where is it? I think it's here. And then Kim. No, it's not on this one. Okay, it's in the other one. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to think about this book that I read. And here. Let's see. What? Am I thinking the wrong person? Let me scroll through. I'm trying to find this. Nope, not Will Larson. Other good book. Where did I put it? Huh. Dun, dun. Great. I cannot find it. Now I'm just looking at the book. Let me see if someone somehow knows what book I'm thinking. I gotta remember this. Why? This is gonna bug me if I don't find it. So let me find it. I think the other place I have it is in my new chapter that I haven't put out yet. So let me look at that. For anyone who's curious, I'll even show this to y'all. I am currently working on a book. Oh, now I gotta. Oops. Oops. That's on me. I just remembered I have this shared with me. Oh, radical candor. Jesus. Oh, God. Oh, well, you can't see the URL anyways. That's good. Radical candor. That's a good, interesting book about like giving feedback and communicating. And I think that's something I really enjoyed in terms of like talking about soft skills and leading teams. The other one, I don't know if I have the book. It's like, oh, is that it? No, it's a different book. There's another book. Oh, it's like Management Way or something. Oh man, too many books that I've read recently. But there's a good couple of good books about management. Actually, I do have. You know what? I also have that in my newsletter. So if you haven't read this one, where is it? Beyond Python and SQL. I think this one has a few books as well. Let's see. What books does this have? Okay, well, this one had Radical Candor too. So I have this article, Beyond Python and SQL Careers, and one of them was Radical Candor. So right here, I had Radical Candor. I like team topologies, organizing businesses and technology teams for fast flow, and then staff engineer leadership beyond management track. So I think those are all good books. Sorry guys, I'm like book titles. There's one other book that I was thinking of, but I can't think of it. What organizations would be approachable to volunteer time to utilize my new skills so I can gain real world experience? This is hard because on one side, there's this view that volunteering time is valuable, and it is. The problem is people have to know what to do with it. And if I have to, for example, like I have people reach out to me all the time and say like, hey, I'd work for you for free. But that means I have to figure out what it would be worth for you to do and then review the work you do. And like, it takes time too out of my day. And so it can be hard to like find someone that's like willing to do work if they don't know what work would be worth doing. So if you can find a space and say, I'm going to figure out this, like some problems in this space. And I'm going to go to someone who I think is a leader, whatever, some, like, I don't know, CEO of a charity or nonprofit, or maybe not the CEO, but like someone who I think would be open to me talking about this topic. I'm going to go to them and talk to them what I think the solution could be and how I could do it. So you need to come, like if you are going to do it, you need to come already with a solution in mind. Don't say like, I have a bunch of skill sets. Say, I think this is a problem for your company. Here's what I do to solve it. And I want to do it for you. And that solves the problem of them having to figure out what to do with you. So I think that's kind of worth it. What is the market share of each major cloud platform in the data engineering space based on your experience? Wow. That's very broad in the sense that different sized organizations have different technologies, right? Snowflake tends to be, I often find, at a lot of mid-sized companies, but there's like, I don't think I could break down a percentage. I think you're looking for an answer for which tool to work or learn with most, because you depends on what you see. If you want a good project there, go scrape Indeed, or go figure out how to scrape Indeed, and figure out what job descriptions are asking for, and that will help answer your question. I think some people have done that before, but like there's a good project for you to take on. Do you use Python, R or Python for code? I heard it's easy to do visualization in R, but I'm learning Python because I find it easier. I mean, I tend to be more of a Python person. I've done my days in R. Tend to be more of a Python person now. Like I learned Java was first, then C#, R, Python, some JavaScript in there, but not too much, a little bit, and lots of SQL. But I mean, I just learned Python if you're more of a data engineer anyways. Have you watched Attack on Titan? Yes, I have. I've watched all of it. Got my wife into it. She was very surprised on how much she liked it. So yeah. Any value into completing CS50 to understand data engineering better? Where's the best place to learn data engineering skill set? I have no experience. If you have no programming or coding experience, yeah, I think CS50 probably is good. I haven't had to go through it actually, or I just haven't gone through it since I learned programming at college. But from my understanding, that's what it would cover. Maybe more, and maybe it covers also some basics of like networking, I'd hope. Data engineering, I think if you really want to learn more about it, one, you can pick up a lot from Joe Reese's book. And that's not me trying to sell, like I get $0 from Joe Reese. It just covers a lot of the fundamentals. And honestly, there's actually a group in my Discord who like reviews. I think they do like a chapter every so often. There's some video links if you just want to look at what they think about the chapters for free. So there's that. And I think there's some people who've covered the chapters for free if you don't want to pay for it just yet. That will give you a good understanding of the baseline, right? Like it's going to give you that CS50 of data engineering. Then from there, I mean, hopefully I've got some videos that help. And if not, you can ask for more. And if not, Zach Wilson has some videos. And if not, the data engineering start data engineering projects is good as well for building data engineering projects. I'm curious, do you have any advice for building SaaS product focused on data engineering or data-centric applications? If you're talking about data-centric applications, mostly in terms of like using data to build a product, I have a few articles about that, like building $1 million data product or data dashboard. Because I've worked for companies that was all they did. They just took data, centralized it, built products from it, whether it was algorithms, whether it was dashboards, etc. And that's actually a very, really common approach, right? Like, hey, we'll do your reporting for you. Going back to does every company need a data team, or can you just buy a SaaS service that will give you your answers? And a lot of companies don't like doing it because they want to feel like they're special. They want to feel like they've got a competitive advantage. Even smaller companies, and then they'll spend $100,000 to, maybe get a small competitive advantage or no competitive advantage. But there's a lot of companies that do exist that do a lot of this reporting for you. So I have a few articles on that. Nice. I'm a principal data engineer. Congrats. Hopefully, is it big tech maybe? In the UK, moving to the US in 3 months. Any recommendations on US specific job hunt? Get referrals. Always get referrals. If you can get referrals, get referrals. Just that's the way. Wait, this isn't who I'm thinking, right? Let me just make sure this isn't who I'm thinking. I don't think it's who I'm thinking, but oh no, that's a totally different name. Totally different name. Okay, but yeah, get referrals will always get it. I'm sure I should know what this means, and even though I've definitely watched Attack on Titan, now I've got to figure out, okay, what am I forgetting here? Shinzo. And the problem is I'm also trying to learn Mandarin, so I see wool, and I'm just thinking, oh, I what? Well, ting budong. I hear, I don't understand. Oh, the song. Is that the song? I never actually knew what the song was called. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Any advice on feeling lost on upskilling for experienced DEs? There's so much to learn. Where do I start? How do I decide what to learn next? I mean, I'd have to know where your skill sets are. I would try to focus on things you like doing, right? I mean, I'm always going to keep going back to that because if you're an experienced data engineer, I assume you're skilled enough that you can pick up new things. And so I would really be trying to look for things like, hey, what's interesting to me right now? Like what would excite me? What technologies excite me? Because I think that's worth digging into more than like what's the best thing for my career next. And also I would look at my soft skills, like, hey, how am I doing on my soft skills? When I communicate, do people understand me? It's harder to like know when you're doing good on soft skills because it's not like you have metrics. And if you're only communicating with other DEs, you will never know. But that's where I would practice as well, right? Like, hey, can I figure out a way to communicate with business people? Can I figure out a way to practice my writing or my presentation skills or, getting buy-in and so on and so forth. So I think that's what I would focus on, because I think that also helps you figure out the lost part, because sometimes you have to kind of go backwards. I like to say, like, when I feel lost or I'm like, oh man, what am I doing? Like, what's the point of all I'm doing? I like going backwards and trying to figure out and reflect on what I've been doing and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Um, you don't always have to move forward, I think is kind of a thing. Like, we are so focused on progress as individuals. I think sometimes we forget to reflect on the actual lessons we've learned, and then we don't actually learn as much. I think there are some lessons you may have missed in your rush to be better and to learn more technologies and to do all that. And so I think it's worthwhile to take a moment and be like, okay, what like what do the current technologies that I know do? What are the current technologies or the new technologies? What are they doing? What's the difference? Are they better? Like, start asking yourself those questions instead of just being like, okay, what's new? Okay, I'm being told this is the new thing. Let me take this new thing. Let me ingest this new thing. Really just take your time and learn it, reflect on it. Now that you have a job, you don't have to if you have the time to learn, you don't have to feel like you have to constantly progress. Feel like you can sit in things and learn them deeply and reflect on them and actually ask yourself what the impact of knowing that knowledge is. Where can I get IoT data? Well, that's going to be hard unless, one, you can get your own IoT devices, right? Like that maybe what was I thinking? I recently said I started growing plants and I've learned nothing about data engineering through it or nothing about data. And obviously people are like, well, there's so much stuff to learn. Yes, I know you can totally learn things, and I'm trying to fight their urge to put some sort of IoT device out there that tracks the moisture level of the soil next to my plants or the heat or something. Cause that's an example. Buy some IoT devices. I don't know if you can buy them. I'm sure you can, or you can maybe build your own that test out moisture levels and heat and different things, and then track how well your plants are doing and count yield and do all that stuff. Build something that actually counts yield. That would be cool too. So there's all these things you could do. Just find something you like doing. And I'm really fighting the desire to do all of that stuff because I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool. But I want to just enjoy planting a garden for the sake of planting a garden and being in it and not trying to turn it into something data-y. Oh, here. Yeah, or just do that. If you want to have less fun, just create something that puts out data or something. But yes. But yeah, you can always just create your own, what's the ambient room temperature or something. So that's kind of my feelings. We're getting close on 2 hours, so I'll probably call it here. I appreciate all y'all's for hanging around here. This was really fun. Hopefully this was helpful at answering some things about career progression. Man, now I want to talk about it's we need a therapy session of how do we grow without feeling like we have to constantly grow. It's at a certain point, yeah, there's career progression is interesting. So hopefully this was helpful. I was going to talk about a bunch of topics. I got a bunch of points, but maybe I'll do that tomorrow instead. You guys all had questions, which is great. I'm thinking about maybe doing this just for this next week, maybe every day, depending on how things go. But thanks everyone for watching. This was a lot of fun. I'll see y'all next time though. Thanks all. Bye.